Protocol having been established, let me first just thank our moderator, Lizetta Duncan Moore, for her tremendous hospitality, and our host, Principal David Newman, for his wonderful hospitality on today. I'm thankful for all of the program participants, and in particular, the young people who have once again displayed their talent and creative brilliance in such a phenomenal way. Today it was Brooklyn Tech, tomorrow it's Radio City Music Hall. We've got to think big for our young people. I'm also, of course, thankful on today for the presence of my lovely wife, Kenny Sandra, our two wonderful sons, Jeremiah and Joshua, my mom, my dad, and many different members of the Jeffries family who have been here with me every step of the way of our public service journey. They've been there with me for 6 years in the New York State Assembly. They've been there with me for 4 years in the House, working side by side with our great president, Barack Obama. Some of y'all were getting nervous on me. And I'm thankful that they stayed with me over the last year in the era of Donald Trump. I'm thankful, of course, for all of my colleagues in government who are here with us today, who were acknowledged earlier, including my sister, the dynamic Congresswoman from the 9th Congressional District, Yvette Clarke, our trailblazing public advocate, Tish James, our newly elected phenomenal City Council Speaker, Corey Johnson. We got so many high-powered elected officials here, it's like the Democratic National Convention. That's a testament to you and the civic engagement that you continue to demonstrate as a community. And so I'm thankful for your presence here during our 5th annual State of the District address. It's my honor and my privilege to represent the hardworking people of the 8th Congressional District, one of the most diverse districts in the nation. 33% of the people I serve were born outside of the United States of America. We know that folk from all over the world come to Brooklyn and Queens to pursue the American dream. And so I have the privilege of representing African Americans, Caribbean Americans, Latinos, the Asian American community, the Orthodox Jewish community, Italian Americans, Irish Americans, Bangladeshi Americans, Turkish Americans, and more Russian-speaking Jewish immigrants from the former Soviet Union than any other member of Congress in the nation. I mean, Hakeem Jeffries, who knew? What a great country we live in. I know from my own experience, diversity in this country is a tremendous strength. It is not a weakness. And that is why I pledge to do everything I can to protect the dreamers who Donald Trump wants to throw out of this country and make sure they can acquire legal status as citizens of the United States of America. Now, these are challenging times. Nor'easters in New York, hurricanes in Florida, Texas, and the Caribbean, wildfires in California, and a man-made disaster in Washington, D.C. We have a president who is tearing us apart at home and threatening to take us to war overseas. Fire and fury sounds like shock and awe. And where did that get us? Nothing but a failed war in Iraq and a failed war in Afghanistan. Thousands of young American lives ruined. Millions of people adversely impacted all across the globe. Trillions of dollars wasted. What we need in this country, what we need in this world is more diplomacy and less talk about nuclear weapons. I pledge to do everything possible to never support the efforts of Donald Trump or his so-called military apparatus to plunge this country into any unjust war, not now, not ever. We are here today gathered in the immediate aftermath of another reckless Republican shutdown. A shutdown that is characteristic of the chaos, crisis, and confusion that has been the Trump presidency since day one. It's been a little over a year since the inauguration of 45, and things haven't gotten any better. They've only gotten worse with this individual. But we know that the resistance has been strong. The resistance across the nation has been fierce. The resistance has been principled. The resistance has been enduring. The resistance is just getting started. At another important moment in our nation's history, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., while speaking during the 1963 March on Washington, talked about the need to confront injustice with the fierce urgency of now. But perhaps my sentiments on the matter and the need for principled resistance to continue are best captured by the words once spoken by the legendary urban entrepreneur, Puff Daddy, when he uttered the phrase, "Can't stop, won't stop." The issues are too important. The stakes are too high. The consequences of inaction are too significant for us to do anything less. Can't stop, won't stop. The Republican agenda is to put a target on the backs of hardworking people like those who live in blue states like New York so they can help their rich friends get richer. And Exhibit A is the tax bill that Donald Trump signed into law last month. Now, April 15th is tax day, and at the outset, it's important to note that the Republican tax scam, this reckless bill, doesn't apply to this year's taxes. It will first take effect in connection with next year's taxes in 2019. And so we have some time to turn this terrible situation around. Once again, our office will be hosting free tax preparation assistance for the residents of the 8th Congressional District in partnership with the Urban Upbound program. Tax specialists will be available in our office to help residents fill out and prepare this year's taxes, and also to answer questions in connection with next year's taxes to put residents in the best possible position. The Republicans have created a mess. And our job is to make sure that we leave no taxpayer behind. Now, Donald Trump and his co-conspirators in the Republican-controlled Congress, they want you to believe that they've done a good thing. Don't believe the hype. I'm in full hip-hop mode right now. Over the next year, House Democrats will make sure that we dissect this tax bill for the American people. We will discuss this tax bill consistently with the American people. We will expose the fraudulent nature of this tax bill on behalf of the American people. We will tattoo this tax bill on the foreheads of every single Republican who voted for it, particularly in New York, and undermine the best interests of the people they were charged to represent. Now, there are two types of states in America: donor states and taker states. Donor states like New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut regularly send more money to the federal government each and every year than we get back in return. Taker states like Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, regularly receive more from the federal government in grant assistance than they send in return. And each and every year, New York State regularly sends more than $40 billion more to Washington, D.C. than we get back in the form of housing, transportation, homeland security, or other forms of federal grant assistance. And the Republican bill will simply make a bad situation for donor states like New York that much worse. The Republican tax bill will not help everyday Americans. It will hurt everyday Americans. It will raise taxes on at least 36 million middle-class families. It will undermine Medicare. It will explode the deficit. It will saddle our children and grandchildren with more than $1.5 trillion in additional debt, simply to pay for tax cuts for millionaires, billionaires, corporations, and big donors to the Republican Party. It is a wolf in sheep's clothing. It is a classic bait and switch. It is a Ponzi scheme of epic proportions that treats individual taxpayers like second-class citizens simply to subsidize the lifestyles of the rich and shameless. Watch this. The individual taxpayer cut is modest. The corporate tax cut is massive. The individual tax cut is temporary. The corporate tax cut is permanent. The state and local tax deduction for individuals is decimated. The state and local tax deduction for corporations is left untouched. The moving expense deduction for individuals is eliminated, but corporations can continue to deduct the moving expenses associated with closing down factories and plants here in this country and moving them overseas to places like China and India, robbing us of good-paying American jobs. Individual taxpayers treated like second-class citizens to subsidize the lifestyles of the rich and shameless. 83% of the Republican tax bill goes to the wealthiest 1% in America. Justice Brandeis, a famous Supreme Court judge decades ago, made the observation that in America, we can have democracy or we can have wealth concentrated in the hands of the very few. But you can't have both. The Republican tax bill is an attack on our democracy. It's an attack on economic fairness. It's an attack on the American dream. We must reject this tax bill. We must repeal this tax bill. We must replace this tax bill and bury it in a legislative graveyard, never to be seen again. Can't stop. Won't stop. Now, it's often been said that Times Square is the crossroads of the world. That may in fact be the case, but over on this side of the river, we also understand that Brooklyn is the center of the universe. But we also are aware that with increased popularity comes about increased problems, particularly as it relates to an affordable housing crisis that continues to ravage working families, middle-class folks, senior citizens, and young people. It's an urgent challenge that requires an urgent response. And we can start by saving Starlight City, the largest federally subsidized housing development in the nation, which is located in the East New York section of the 8th Congressional District. Last fall, the current owners of Starlight City announced a potential sale of a development that is home to thousands of hard-working New Yorkers. Now, under current law, New York State housing officials must approve any potential sale. Under current law, the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development must also approve any potential sale. Under current law, the apartments at Starlight City must remain affordable through the year 2039, but thereafter, any owner is free to charge market rate rents, which almost no one could afford to pay. And so I've been working hard to make it clear to New York State housing officials under the leadership of Governor Andrew Cuomo and to the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development that if any change in ownership is approved, the existing affordability agreement must be enforced. The existing affordability agreement must be extended beyond the year 2039, and the existing affordability agreement must be enhanced to make it clear that not a single resident of Starlight City is displaced. Because if they can gentrify Starlight City, the largest federally subsidized housing development in the nation, nothing in New York City is safe. And we will not allow the gentrification steamroller to continue to run over our communities. Now, public housing is affordable housing, and affordable housing is public housing. And so it's important for us to continue to protect the residents of public housing who live in Fort Greene and Clinton Hill, Bedford-Stuyvesant and Brownsville, Canarsie and Coney Island, and all points in between. Public housing residents are hardworking, community-centered individuals who for decades survived the tough times and helped to turn things around throughout our communities. They deserve to live in housing that is safe, decent, and affordable. They deserve to live in housing with heat that works, playgrounds that are safe, and senior centers that are vibrant. They deserve to live in housing that is free of lead poisoning and mold. They deserve to live in housing that is filled with hope and economic opportunity. But we know that the situation that public housing residents face on a day-to-day basis is a perilous one. The unmet capital maintenance and repair needs of public housing developments is approximately $20 billion in New York City alone. For far too long, the federal government has gotten out of the business of protecting public housing residents, and it's time for that to change. Now, Donald Trump has said he wants a $1 trillion infrastructure plan, but he needs Democratic votes in order to get it done. And so I've made it clear to Democratic leaders in the House and in the Senate that we should not support any infrastructure plan unless it provides the resources necessary to address the unmet capital, repair, and maintenance needs of public housing developments. If Congress can find $1 trillion to repair our nation's bridges, roads, and tunnels, we can certainly find $20 billion to repair our public housing developments and make sure that those residents can live with the dignity and respect that they deserve. Now, throughout the year, I also look forward to working with all of my colleagues in government. And Congresswoman Yvette Clarke and Public Advocate Tish James and the Borough President and I have been meeting to discuss the development of a 5-point comprehensive housing plan to deal with the displacement that is taking place in our communities. We know that gentrification represents an existential threat to the racial, socioeconomic, cultural, and artistic diversity that we love in Brooklyn and in Queens. That is why we need all hands on deck at every level of government to support a 5-point housing plan that I call Operation Preserve 2.0. We're going to fight to make sure, first, that every single resident in a rent-regulated apartment who is dragged into housing court by a bad landlord has a pro bono lawyer to represent them free of charge. Second, we're going to fight to make sure that the New York State Tenant Protection Unit, which I helped to create in 2011, floods our communities with the resources necessary to stop the harassment that is taking place. Third, we will fight to make sure that our district attorney continues to aggressively prosecute landlords who break the law by forcing people out of their rent-regulated apartments in order to artificially create vacancies so they can then charge market-rate rents that no one from the community can afford to pay. Fourth, we will fight to make sure that every single resident who is eligible participates in the Senior Citizen Rent Increase Exemption Program that freezes rents for senior citizens who are living on a fixed income. Finally, we will fight to stop unjust tax lien and foreclosure sales that are robbing people of their homes after years and years of hard work and sacrifice. A 5-point anti-displacement comprehensive housing plan I call Operation Preserve 2.0. Enough is enough. Gentrification is a cancer that is eradicating community after community. It must be stopped. We will not rest until we're able to do every single thing possible to preserve the wonderfully diverse communities I'm privileged to represent. Can't stop. 50 years ago, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. died in Memphis, Tennessee. His life was taken by an assassin's bullet, but it was a life that was incredibly well lived. Throughout his journey, Dr. King fought for our freedom. He fought for economic justice for poor whites and for poor blacks. He fought against the unjust war in Vietnam. He fought for passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, fought for passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, fought for passage of the 1968 Fair Housing Act. He had to deal with Bull Connor in Birmingham. He had to deal with Sheriff Jim Clark in Selma. He had to deal with Governor George Wallace in Alabama, who made the racist proclamation, segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. But I believe that Dr. King could never have imagined that 50 years after his death, America would be dealing with the Grand Wizard of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Can I talk to y'all for a moment? We have a president who throughout his life has never hesitated to fan the flames of racial hatred whenever he thinks it's in his own personal, political, or professional interests. And he's been doing it for a mighty long time. In the 1970s, it was the Trump Organization that was sued by the Nixon Justice Department for racial discrimination against Black and Latino housing applicants who they were intentionally excluding from their properties in Brooklyn and in Queens. In the 1980s, it was Donald Trump who led the lynch mob that targeted the Central Park Five, Black and Latino teenagers who were wrongfully charged, wrongfully convicted, and wrongfully imprisoned for a crime they did not commit. For 5 years, it was Donald Trump who perpetrated the racist lie that Barack Obama was not born in the United States of America as part of an effort to try to viciously delegitimize our nation's first black president. He then rode that lie into the White House. As President of the United States of America, in the aftermath of Charlottesville, he provided aid and comfort to neo-Nazis and those who were worshiping at the altar of white supremacy. He used racially derogatory terms to describe hardworking people from Haiti and the continent of Africa, and he did it in the Oval Office. He plays political footsie with David Duke, hires people like Steve Bannon, endorses bigots like Roy Moore. He's the quintessential, unrepentant birther-in-chief. But let me make this clear. 50 years after the death of Martin Luther King Jr., it's time for the so-called president to start honoring that tremendous legacy of racial progress and inclusion in America and stop acting like a two-bit racial hustler. And whenever and wherever he continues his ways, I want to make it clear tonight that I'm going to be right there on the floor of the House of Representatives to keep it real, to speak truth to power, and to put my foot. Y'all know what I'm trying to say. Can't stop. Can't stop. Can't stop. Let me end with this observation. Winston Churchill, the legendary British Prime Minister, during a moment of great peril with London under attack from Nazi Germany, gave a speech to the House of Commons in June of 1940, where he stated, "We shall fight them on the beaches, fight them on the landing grounds, fight them in the streets, fight them in the fields, fight them in the hills. We shall never surrender until the might and power of the new world comes to the rescue and liberation of the old." Today we face a similar moment of tremendous peril. Donald Trump and his right-wing legions are on the march. We want to move the country forward. They want to turn back the clock. We want to bring people together. They want to tear us apart. We're trying to create better jobs, better wages, a better future, and a better deal for everyday Americans. They simply want a better life for the wealthy and the well-off. But we will fight them with every single thing that we have. We will fight them in the House, fight them in the Senate, fight them in the courts, fight them on television, fight them on radio, fight them on Twitter, fight them in the streets. We shall never surrender. We shall never surrender. We shall never surrender. Now you may be saying, well, they control the House, the Senate, and the presidency. How can we defeat them? But we have something that's even more significant than political power. We have people power. There's strength in unity. Let's just check the record. We stuck together and stopped them from repealing the Affordable Care Act. We stuck together and Trump Care was defeated. We stuck together and the Muslim ban has been declared unconstitutional. We stuck together and sanctuary cities are alive and well. We stuck together and stopped Donald Trump from building his ridiculous border wall. We stuck together and Jeff Sessions has been forced to recuse himself. We stuck together and the Department of Justice has been compelled to announce a special prosecutor to investigate the Trump campaign. We stuck together and Michael Flynn was forced to resign in disgrace. We stuck together and ran Steve Bannon out of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. We stuck together and Trump's phony voter fraud commission has been disbanded. We stuck together and Roy Moore was defeated. Doug Jones is the United States Senator from the state of Alabama. When we stick together, we can accomplish anything and stop this reckless presidency dead in its tracks. Can't stop. God bless you and God bless the 8th Congressional District.